morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, The Business Case, Gender Equality at Work. We will start the program at exactly 2:30, but before that, let me just put up the reminder slide again for everyone. Thank you. It is already 2:30. We are starting the program now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamela Alindogan. I am your host.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And
once again, I'd like to say good afternoon and welcome to our event today. My name is Jamela Alindogan. I am your host and moderator for today's event. I'd like to welcome you to the Business Case for Gender Equality at Work, organized by the Norwegian Embassy, the Embassy of Sweden in Manila, Asian Development Bank, the Royal Danish Embassy in Manila, and the Embassy of Finland in Manila. Again, we'd like to welcome our Zoom and live stream audience today. And we really have a lot to unpack today because we've got a lot of speakers from all over the world who've gathered today to discuss something that's very crucial and important in the issue of gender and equality. But first, I'd like to talk about the webinar house rules that we have in place. For panelists and speakers, may we ask you to please keep their mic on mute when you're not speaking, and for our audience, should you have questions and other things that you'd like to share, you may do so via the Q&A function. Now, I'd like to, I believe that we do have a video that will be played shortly.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and all participants in the Philippines. And good morning to those who are joining us from the Nordic countries. I hope you are all okay and safe in these challenging times. Nordic collaboration is a priority for all Nordic countries. This forum is a good example. I'm also happy to have the Asian Development Bank as a partner in organizing this event. In addition to this, I am delighted to have Vice President Leni Robredo, a steadfast advocate for gender equality, as our keynote speaker. As the Minister for Employment in Sweden, I am happy to contribute to the work of the world's first feminist government. This means that gender equality is central to the government priorities in decision-making and resource allocation. Women and men, in all their diversity, must have the same power to shape society and their own lives. This is a human right and a matter of democracy and justice. Breaking deep-rooted, unequal gender power relations and enhancing women's economic participation and empowerment are key to strengthening their fundamental rights, including sexual and reproductive health and rights. In the creation of the Swedish welfare state, gender equality has been a major factor. Access to affordable childcare, parental insurance, and a more equal division of parental leave and individual taxation are essential reforms. They have all had an important impact on women's labor market participation, earnings, well-being, and bargaining power in the household. The progress made towards gender equality has contributed to Sweden's high levels of employment and growth. But it has not happened by itself. It is largely the result of political will and decisions, together with hard work from a strong civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, economic equality between women and men is a crucial aspect of gender equality. Women and men must have the same opportunities and conditions to support themselves and any children they might have. However, COVID-19 has bluntly put the apparent gaps in women's economic independence in focus. And it has put into focus what we already knew, that many women have a weaker position on the labor market. Women more often work part-time in low-paid jobs and in sectors with less secure conditions. Many women bear most of the responsibility for the unpaid work at home. And, as we all know, part-time jobs and low wages also result in low pensions. Taken together, these conditions contribute to making women becoming more dependent on their partner. At the same time, women have to a large extent worked at the front line of the pandemic in healthcare and elderly care, thus bearing a heavy burden and standing a great risk of being exposed to the virus themselves. In responding to the pandemic, work conditions in female-dominated sectors, such as the health and care sectors, must be addressed. But we must also address the role of men and boys as drivers for change. Men and boys, in all their diversity, must be part of transforming gender norms and inequality. To conclude, Sweden will continue pushing for women's and girls' economic empowerment. As a concrete example, Sweden is one of the co-leaders in the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights within the framework of the UN initiative Generation Equality. It is about building a better world and a better future for everyone. Economic gender equality is key in this work. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Swedish Minister for Employment, who was also a member of the Social Democratic Party. Her ministry is responsible for the labor market, the integration of immigrants into the labor market, the labor law, and work environment. That's Minister Eva Nordmark. Now we'll talk about our next speaker, who was also instrumental in crafting a successful flagship anti-poverty program called Angat Buhay. This organization has also been focused on women empowerment as a key advocacy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines, VP Lenny Robredo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we are all keeping safe and well. Congratulations to the Nordic embassies in Manila and the Asian Development Bank and your partners, the Global In-House Center Council Philippines, and the Women Inter-Industry Network for organizing this event. A more gender-equal world is one of the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Here at home, international indicators seem to paint a good picture of where we stand. The Philippines ranked 17th out of 156 countries in the 2021 Global Gender Gap Index report by World Economic Forum. This is the second highest in East Asia and the Pacific, behind only New Zealand. The gap in educational attainment between genders is being bridged, and scores for health and survival are also high. Viewed from this lens, it appears that all is well. But this forum invites us to reflect deeper. Have we truly created an environment where genuine gender equality exists in business, politics, and greater leadership? Have we done enough to ensure that women and people from all genders have a real chance to develop themselves, find their voice, and inspire others to follow after them? Today, we take an earnest look at transforming business as usual. The Philippines has often been lauded for having many legal and institutional measures which mandate greater gender equality, but the living reality on the ground does not always reflect the same picture. Let me illustrate. Women comprise half of the Philippine population. And while employment for women has improved over the years, the International Labor Organization reports that women participation in the labor force has remained relatively stagnant at around 45% since 1991. A 2019 survey by the Makati Business Club also revealed that only 3% of CEOs in the Philippines are women. Philippine politics also suffers this disparity. On the national level, the current composition of the Senate has 7 women senators, the most of any Congress. But this is still less than half the chamber. In the entire history of the Senate, no woman has served as Senate President. According to the Commission on Elections, from 1998 to 2013, more than 80% of elected officials in the Philippines were men. When I served in Congress in 2013, I worked with 60 sister legislators, while the men numbered 174. Clearly, gender balance in the highest levels of leadership has a long way to go. We are all well aware that this problem is not solved by simply hiring more women and expecting things to change overnight. Making gender equality work challenges us to rethink our culture. Institutionalizing policies that advance gender rights creates formal avenues to address harassment. This is a good place to start. Beyond this, progress in workplace culture calls us to examine our higher leadership practices, to abandon traditions that could entrench othering, discrimination, or sexism in the workplace. This also means standing up to the greater societal pressures and stereotypes that have burdened women and other genders for so long. Many women with full-time jobs, for example, are still expected to bear the brunt of household work and are judged as bad wives or mothers if they don't. Likewise, our programs must continue to challenge conventional notions of productivity. We must keep on exploring, for example, policies such as longer leaves for parents and additional support services for mothers, the LGBTQ community, and solo parents. After all, when our staff feel seen and heard as fellow human beings with dignity, they become more involved, investing more of themselves into their tasks and therefore raising the quality of their output. Making diversity work for everyone demands understanding that crafting better workplace policies and HR practices are a means towards a much more sustainable, much more business-friendly end, changing for the better the dynamics of power in the workplace, in our homes, in our communities. In so doing, we widen the avenues of opportunity and create a richer, more competitive labor force. We begin to tap into a vaster reservoir of talent and ignite a cycle of inclusiveness that yields more innovation and more productivity. And because workers are part of the market as well, the public consequently becomes more empowered to avail of our products and services. This gathering is an invitation to reinvigorate our efforts and explore ways forward towards a more holistic kind of leadership, where all interests are valued and all struggles are given equal space to be heard. I look forward to the insights that this forum will yield. I and the rest of the Office of the Vice President stand ready to work with you towards a world where all glass ceilings are broken and where no one is left behind. Thank you and congratulations.
And that was Vice President Lenny Robredo. Now, our next speaker will talk about the barriers for women to join and stay in the workforce with a focus on the Asia region. She's the Chief of Gender at the Asian Development Bank, where she provides leadership for advancing gender equality across all aspects of ADB operations and knowledge work. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ms. Samantha Hung.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamila. It's a pleasure to be here today, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone that's on the call. I hope everyone is safe and well. So following on from those insightful introductions by Minister Nordmark and VP Libredo, what I'd like to do is provide a brief overview of the situation in the Asia Pacific region, and I have a few slides to do so. So if I could please move to the next slide. What I would like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is provide you with a broad sweep overview of the situation of women in the labor market in Asia and the Pacific, drawing on some key statistics from the Philippines. Also, what are some of the key barriers to labor market participation for women? Thirdly, how can we possibly make workplaces better for women or make them work for women? And lastly, a brief overview of how ADB supports women to join and stay in the workforce. So if I could have the next slide, please. So what you can see in this graph is that the labor force participation rate in the region has been pretty much stagnating in the region for at least over 2 decades now, with widening gender gaps. And I think VP Loretta mentioned this, but if you look at the situation of the Philippines on the right, you see that pretty much it has not changed for some time. And based on 2018 figures, the Philippines actually had the lowest female labor force participation rate in the ASEAN region, standing at about 46%. So if you compare this to other countries in the region, you have Malaysia that are higher. They have a labor force participation in the low 70s. If I could move to the next slide. Can I please the next slide?
Sam is already up.
All right, I will wait a little bit to get Miss Samantha back, but I believe that she's talked about the situation in the Asia Pacific region and made a particular note of what has happened in the Philippines over the past almost 30 years, where the number of female participation in the workplace has remained stagnant since 1991. I believe that the current figures, according to ILO, is that the participation of women remains at 41%, men at 72%. And VP Lenny Robredo also talked about the difficulty of many women in the workplace, and she spoke particularly about political representation. And why is the political representation of women critical in any country? That's because when you have more female women in politics, then there is a better chance of actually policies that will be possibly developed in favor and will help advance women's causes in the Philippines. She talked about political and economic participation and breaking gender stereotypes. So
Can I please on my phone?
Oh yeah, so I think we got Miss Samantha back. We'll continue to hear from Miss Samantha again.
Hi, I'm very sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I think I got thrown out of the system.
You have the floor once again.
Okay, thank you. So picking up where I left off, yes, I was saying that the labor force participation rate had stagnated pretty much over the past 2 decades. But as you can see in this slide, and I think was mentioned earlier, the COVID situation has actually just made this worse. What you can see here is that the sectors that are most hard hit are largely female dominated. And this has meant that 41% of women are represented in these hard hit sectors compared to 35% of men. And if you take that back to the Philippines situation, where we have a large proportion of overseas Filipino workers, we're seeing also a larger proportion of women represented in deployed Filipino workers that are returning home. And this means that there is an increasing the amount of unemployed women in the Philippines context. If I could move on to the next slide, please. So if you look at what are the reasons for this, the second part of my presentation, the key barriers for women in the workforce, there are many, but in a nutshell, what I try to illustrate by the graph here is that you often see the pattern of women's labor force participation looking like a letter M. So it sort of goes up and down. And this really mirrors women's life stages in that women enter in relatively high numbers. And then at the time when they may decide to have a family, they may drop out, but they will return later on in their life cycle. And what this means is that it has a significant impact on their ability to progress in their career. And it also has an impact on their ability to accumulate wealth, including pensions and other benefits, and also their skill development as they are going through their career. So in addition to this pattern, we still see a significant job segregation in terms of the feminization of the labor force, and women are overly dominated in certain types of employment, often that are less valued and with lower pay, including in the informal sector. And we also have this phenomenon double phenomenon that we call sticky floors, combined with glass ceilings. And by sticky floors, we mean that women are often more trapped in lower skilled and lower paid jobs. And that means they are less likely to be able to move up the career chain. But at the same time, and I think VP Loretta said this, we have fewer women at the top level in terms of CEOs and at corporate boards and at senior management, which also means that this has an impact on the gender responsiveness of these organizations for creating an inclusive workplace for women, but it also means that there are fewer female role models at the high level for women to be mentored and aspire towards. If you look at the gender pay gap in the Philippines, it's about 16%, which is actually not too bad compared to the global average, which is about 12.5%. But as you get into the workplace culture as well, you also have a situation where women may experience other forms of harassment or lack of family policies, which means it makes it harder for them to stay in the workforce, or it's a less inclusive environment for them to be in. If I could please move to the next slide. So unpaid care work, and with the pandemic, we have seen that, and I'm sure many of you have heard, that this has increased significantly for women because of the fact that women are increasingly responsible for the higher care of whether it be sick family members or due to lockdowns where children are learning at home. This is just detracting from their ability to engage in the labor force. But even irrespective of the COVID situation, women in Asia Pacific, as you can see from the graph on the left, work some of the longest hours in the world when you combine what they do at home and what they do at work. So here you can see up to 11 times more in the case of Pakistan. Unfortunately, we do not have Philippine-specific data because there was no time use survey which captured this in recent years. However, we can anticipate that the trends would be similar. But studies are also increasingly pointing to the fact that unpaid care work, not surprisingly, is an important determinant for low female labor force participation. And as you can see on the right, in countries where there is greater inequality in the household distribution, in other words, women do more of the unpaid care work at home than men, there is a correlation with lower female labor force participation. And next slide, please. So why is this? I mean, it boils down to a range of factors, but social norms in terms of what is expected of women in society and at home, in study and in terms of the workplace still play a very strong role. And I think that Vipi Loredo mentioned earlier that, you know, what is the expectation on women, and is it perceived negatively if they make the choices away from their family responsibilities towards a workplace responsibility? So this slide here shows a study from the World Values Survey, which asks the question, do men make better business executives than women? And not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, that there is a consistent perception across these countries that men who still dominate decision-making make better business executives. So that's quite telling in terms of showing that how strong some of the perceptions run, even when the labor force participation rate is increasing and showing otherwise. If I could move on to the next slide, please. So what do we do about this situation? I mean, if we accept the fact that it is more positive and a good economic and social decision for more women to be in the labor force, how do we address this and how do we make workplaces better for women? And I think there's a lot we can learn from the sharing of Nordic experience with Asia Pacific in today's webinar. Some of these were alluded to the minister in her opening video, but these are some of the policies that can make an impact. When the graph on the right shows here the difference in the coverage of maternity and paternity leave across the Asia Pacific, and you can see, not surprisingly, that the provision for maternity leave days is much higher than for paternity leave days. So when we're talking about redistribution of work and that policies that can be put in place to make it easier for women and men to share this responsibility, this is an important area to consider. Flexible work policies also helps in that it will enable women and men to better balance. Provision of childcare and good quality childcare, of course, is an important area, and this is something that ADB is actually looking into at the moment. And in terms of the actual workplace, ensuring that zero tolerance on sexual harassment and policies are in place at the workplace. And this is in line with an ILO convention which speaks about that specific issue, and providing the right career development programs and mentorship, And quite often we find that targets around these specific issues, targets on representation for women at different levels of the organization can make a big difference. Moving on, please. So moving back to Asian Development Bank and what this means for us. We have for the ADB in our current corporate strategy 2030, which takes us to the year 2030, accelerating progress in gender equality is seen as one of 7 operational priorities. So we see it as critical to everything that we do for the positive and sustainable development of the region. So when we talk about employment and creating decent work and quality jobs for women, it cuts across the board, but it is particularly important for the first pillar in terms of women's economic empowerment, which then of course has flow-on effects for the human development of women, as well as their decision-making and their ability to be resilient. So how we do that, if I could just move on to the next slide, is that we support this through a full range of our investments in both the public and private sector. And we do this by introducing measures to support women in work, in education and upskilling in our different projects. So at project level, we would actively promote targets for skilled jobs for women across all sectors. And we do this through ensuring that equal pay for equal work is the expectation for any jobs that are created. But we also try to encourage decent work by promoting women into jobs where we know that there are increasing opportunities, where there's greater pay and there's more skill, and also those that are considered less traditional for women. So some examples where we're doing this is, for example, in Pakistan, we're working with 2 state-owned energy companies to establish a specific apprenticeship and mentorship program for young female graduates to encourage more women into this male-dominated sector. In the Philippines, we've been working with the government to increase employment of young women through a school to transition to work program, which includes programs with TESDA, the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, also to encourage girls and women into less traditional sectors. In the Central and West Asia region, we also have introduced targets for women to become engineers in the water sector and to open more leadership and management roles. Those are just some simple examples, but we have many of these across our portfolio. In our private sector operations department, where we work with private sector clients, we also try to work with them to introduce, I guess, policy type changes that are similar to what is the focus of this discussion, in terms of how they can adopt better HR policies, including targets for women on boards, introducing an organizational sexual harassment policy and procedures for implementing that. And we are also increasingly looking at gender lens investing targets to encourage more investments in women-owned business. And last but not least, I think core to what we do is that all our activities really address and adopt a social norms approach, that we really need to address the sustainable transformative gender agenda in line with Sustainable Development Goal 5, to ensure that we really address the root causes of gender inequality in the workplace and in the broader society, that actually is about power and redistributing the power between women and men and finding ways to transform them for the benefit of productivity, for the benefit of society and the development of the country. So with that, I will end my presentation, and I really look forward to the ongoing discussion, and apologies for that technical glitch earlier. Thank you.
No worries, Ms. Samantha. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Indeed, even though it comes as no surprise, it's still quite disappointing that, you know, women in the Asia Pacific still work the longest hours, and the barrier are not just only in policies, but also in social and cultural norms. Ms. Samantha also talked about the many barriers, such as job segregation, low skilled paid jobs, of course, the glass ceiling that we can't seem to ever break fully, the gender payback and workplace culture, of course, a sexual harassment workplace, and also the lack of family and friendly policies that can actually help women have better working environment and space in the workplace. We also heard from her when she talked about Pakistan and how they were able to establish mentorship for young female graduates. And of course, in the Philippines, they're already tackling discriminatory and social norms. So we've heard about the challenges, we've heard about the failures, and of course, the difficulties. And we'd like to hear from someone from the other side of the globe who managed to help shape policies that advanced women's agenda from that particular part of the continent. He's a former member of the Norwegian Parliament and government minister. And in 2003, he introduced changes to Norwegian law requiring Norwegian publicly listed companies to have a board with at least 40% of its members from each gender beginning in 2006. Mr. Ansgar Gabrielsen will talk about the Nordic model for gender equality in the workplace. Mr. Gabrielsen, welcome and thank you for talking to us and joining us this afternoon here. And good morning to you, by the way.
Good afternoon to you and all the participants. Well, in Norway, it's morning at least. Well, I will normally when I have a speech around the world about this topic, I'm very care about recommending what you should do. Normally, I'm talking about what we did in Norway when I was in the cabinet. And to be honest, it's 16 years ago since I was in politics. So I have been in the consultant branch since then. And I was thinking about what I heard Samantha Hope from DB said, that it had stagnated in Asia for the last 30 years. When it comes to participation rate for women in the work. And that says to me that we have to do maybe more of the same, or maybe we should do something else. I don't know. And and the vice president of the Philippines, Robredo, said that 3% of the CEO were women. And what I can say that it's when I was in the cabinet in the beginning of 2000 to 2005, the situation in Norway, in the Nordic country, in Europe, in US was that it was about 10% of the member of the boards in listed company were women. And in Europe and at least in the Nordic country, for the last 30, 40 years, 50% of the students in higher education has been our boys and our girls. So from my point of view, there was no reason to go on with the same situation. And we had a dialogue with the business area for 10 years when I was member of parliament in the Committee of Industry. And they said, we will fix it ourselves. But it did not happen. It did not happen in Norway. It did not happen anywhere. So I decided as minister that I will have a proposal that I will do something else. That do not mean that we shall stop doing all the other things we just have heard about here. But we have sometimes in the politics in our countries, we have to do something else. And I'm very care about telling what you should do in Philippines, in Asia, in other countries. And especially as a former minister, that's not not what I should do. But I will tell you what my thinking is and was, and maybe that can help you to pick up some ideas. First of all, I think it's very important to engage the top level in politics, and not only the women, but the men. You have to find men who are burning for this area. I remember I had a visit in the French embassy in Norway, and that was a delegation from the French Senate. And one of the members of the Senate was a woman who had been a minister for the family affairs in France. And she said, no, I understand why it has happened, what you have done in Norway. And they said, because you are a man, you are a conservative politician, and you are from the industry area. The situation in many countries is that equality between sexes and all these questions is always more or less run by women. And it's very often politicians on the left side, and they are not from the business area. So that was one of the situations around our proposal. And our proposal and my proposal was not only about the gender affairs. It is about value creation. It is about using the whole population. And in more or less all the countries around the world now, more or less I say, it is our university are filled up 50-50 with our daughters and our sons. So that means that there are no reason that we for the next 30 years in Philippines or anywhere shall have a situation where 3% of the CEOs are women. And so we do all agree probably about the goal in the long run, but what shall be the situation in I would say 20, 30 years in many countries. But to reach that goal, you have to do probably something else than what you are doing right now. We have to, of course, take our culture into consideration and all the specific thing in our countries. But sometimes in politics, you need to do something else, at least add something to what you are doing. And when it comes to this area, by equality on a wider perspective, it was very good, the speech from the Minister for Sweden, what she said. And that's a situation, I think, both in the Nordic countries and in Europe, it's coming, and it's coming more or less all over the world. But of course, it will take a few years more in some country than others. But when it comes to the business area, where is my area, I think we have to go through a law. If we want to speed it up, at least, we have to do that. The situation in 2001 in Norway, when I became Minister of Industry, 6% of the members of the board in the listed companies were women. And when the law was introduced and implemented, the situation is 40%. And I think that means that boards that have a balance between the sexes, they will have another focus on who shall be the next CEO, who shall be director of this and that. And that perspective and that agenda in the board is very important to reach the long-term goal, namely equality between the sexes. And the situation in the business area and in the board, we are very engaged on creating values, and that's business. And there are a lot of reports. I haven't read them since when I was a minister, but it said that was made in US more or less a lot of investigating. That was that companies that are engaged when it comes to equality, they do a better business as well. And that, of course, the problem is not the women that want to come in. The problem is always the guys who have to go out. And I'm grown up in business area, so I know how it works from the inside. I know how it was recruited to the company's boards. That was the guys who went to fishing trips, hunting trips, sailing trips, and they decided it when they came home. The board was decided. And what we did was to have focus on value creation. And if I shall be very, let me see, outspoken, normally I don't give recommendation, but if I should do that, that will be to get speed up. And that means let the lawmakers make laws that say the listed company, I say listed company first, need to have 40% of both sexes. I think that will be, and the next thing is find mentors that are men who can go in the war for that question. Thank you from Norway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gabrielsen. And indeed, you have to engage the top level, the highest level of politics, if possible. But we know at the Asia Pacific, that's not always very easy. He talked also about, that not only women, that women are not the only ones we need to engage in order to create a more gender equal environment, but we also need to engage men who are already at that level or well within that circle, and actually make them understand why, they need to basically open and widen the space for women. He said that in 2001, 6% of members of companies were women. When the law was introduced after that, you had 40% of women. So there is a need for a peripheral focus to widen the space for women so that they can participate better, and also to change basically the way we look at policies and changes by engaging men. And I think that was very important to hear from Mr. Gabrielsen, a complete change of thinking and belief and look at the social and cultural norms. Now, we're moving to another part of our program where we will be hearing from different representatives and executives of different organizations who will share to us their experience in making gender equality actually work by changing the work environment in their own organizations and in their own companies. So we have several speakers today who will be sharing their experiences and what they have done internally. And we hope to hear from them and get tips and ideas of how we can move forward in advancing women's policies and gender workspaces. We'll hear first from Mr. Mark Linzel, who is the CEO for Global English Accounts for Transcom. Mr. Mark Linzel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And thank you to the team from the Nordic embassies and from the ADB team. First of all, who's Transcom? We are, next slide, please. We're a global outsourcing organization that employs some 26,000 people around the world, operating in 23 different countries, supporting 33 different languages. And we, as an organization, just bear with me a second. We as an organization have and continue to take gender diversity incredibly seriously. Here in the Philippines, we employ some 10,000 people. And apart from it just being right, the right thing to promote, gender equality equally makes sound economic sense, certainly when it comes to reliability, quality, and consistency of work, or even empathy. Given our industry, particularly BPO, many of the work types that we engage in require a high degree of customer care. Over the years, in Transcom, particularly here in the Philippines, we pioneered solutions to encourage gender diversity. For example, in all of our sites, we have provided and continue to provide free childcare facilities, lactation rooms for new mums. Digital recruitment has been pioneered primarily to remove some of the biases within the hiring process. We've introduced HMO benefits for same-sex partners. And we've also spent a lot of time and energy in developing learning packages for our leadership, which focus again on diversity and inclusion and removing conscious or unconscious biases. We're equally incredibly proud of our NGO partnerships, such as the Red Whistle, which focuses on HIV awareness and education. We've recently worked with Connected Women, helping women become economically independent, and which also promotes women entrepreneurs here in the Philippines. And next slide. Globally, Transcom has an ambition to achieve a gender balance of 50-50, but you can see here in the Philippines, we're well ahead of that. Incidentally, the Philippines, as a delivery center for Transcom, delivers almost double the profitability of other parts of our group. And not just because of labor arbitrage, but because of higher output and higher efficiency, and in large part, thanks to our diverse workplace. Quite frankly, it goes without saying that an organization such as Transcom, culture really matters. And as a result, gender diversity does too. It's not just a nice to have, it's a necessity, particularly for an organization that wishes to be relevant in the 21st century, in order to both attract and retain the best talent. Hopefully, what I've just shared is helpful in aiding today's discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to being part of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lindsay. Indeed, I like that part where you said, well, it's not just nice to have, it is a necessity that you have pioneered solutions such as free childcare facilities, lactation room, HMO for same-sex partners, and of course, training to remove this long-standing unconscious bias within the work environment, especially in the conditions here in the Philippines. Now, we'll hear more of that. I will look forward to hearing more from Mr. Lindsay in a few minutes. But first, we'd like to hear from the Regional Head of Human Resources of Danfoss Asia Pacific, Ms. Audrey Chong. Good afternoon.
Good morning and good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you are based. So I am Audrey Chong, and I'm responsible for HR for the Asia Pacific region with Danfoss. Very happy to be given the opportunity here today to participate in this forum, to share and also to learn from the rest on this very important topic. So in Danfoss globally, we have built diversity and inclusion on the agenda, and diversity for us is reflected in 5 dimensions. These are gender, age, nationality, experiences, and also people with different individual characteristics. So having a diverse workforce is not enough, as we need to also cultivate an inclusive environment where our diverse workforce can have the same voice and equal opportunities to grow and develop. So today in Danfoss globally, 20% of our leaders are female. We know we can do more in this area, and it is also business critical, as you have heard from the rest of the speaker. Therefore, we have launched an ambitious target globally to increase our female leadership ratio to 30% in 5 years. In Asia Pacific, where I'm responsible for, today, 25% of our leaders are female, and with the same aim of reaching 30% by 2025, we focus our initiatives on 3 key milestones throughout the employee's life cycle. In the pre-employment stage, we know we have to start engaging our potential candidates from a very early stage. Our team organizes talks and seminars regularly at the universities to bring the Danfoss brand early to the students. In the region, we have graduate trainee programs where we increase our talent pipeline, and here we ensure that we have a good balance of gender when we recruit the trainees. On job advertisement, we review regularly to ensure we use gender inclusive words, especially when we are an engineering company where it's a more male-dominated kind of industry. We want to make sure that we use gender inclusive words, so we normalize the idea that anyone can perform a job regardless of their gender identity. During the development stage, it's critical that we equip our potential female employees with the right tools, support and development to succeed in the company. We conducted a survey recently to understand from our female employees what are their challenges, what are the kind of support they are looking forward to help them move forward and upward. With this insight into specific needs, we are then able to develop a more targeted program to support our female employees. In our talent review and succession planning processes as well, we pay attention in having female employees on our list to be discussed, and the personalized development plans are then put in place to support them in their growth. Another key finding from the survey is that our employees, female employees, are looking out for more internal and external networking opportunities, where this will help them in getting to know different people and also in their career progression. So our plan here is to create some of these networking opportunities as part of their development. To retain them, we worked on creating an inclusive environment of mutual trust and respect, where it is safe to speak out and also to be themselves as part of the Danfoss DNA. As a female leader and mother of 3 children, I truly appreciate being empowered and given the flexibility to decide on how and where I will work from, especially during the time when I was growing my career and my children were younger. Allowing a flexible work arrangement will surely put your organization in a better position in attracting candidates and retaining talents. Thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to a fruitful discussion shortly.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chong. It's nice to hear that, you know, you've got in a male-dominated company or industry such as yours, that you've provided basically safe spaces. The more important part is to create a space where it is safe to speak up. I mean, that's more difficult to do because it requires more than just putting policies on paper. It requires to actually build trust and confidence between employers and employees. Now, we'd like to hear from the Vice President of Sustainability for BDO Unibank, Ms. Marla Garin Alvarez. Ms. Marla, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamila, and thank you so much to the Nordic Embassies and ADB for the invitation to speak with this esteemed panel of speakers and representatives from other companies and organizations. So BDO Unibank is the largest bank in the Philippines in terms of consolidated resources, deposits, assets under management, and also in terms of branches. We have over 1,400 all over the Philippines, as well as employees. So I'm really here to share with you two key learnings in how we approach gender equality at BDO. Next slide, please. So the first one is really harnessing the power of data. And you've heard some of this earlier from our VP Lenny and also from our speakers. And here I'd just like to share some of the key data that we look at in terms of assessing where we are for those who are starting their journey in gender equality and for those who are sustaining theirs. And in a way, BDO is somewhere in between. And I will explain later why that is so. So on the upper left side, this is actually the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report for 2020. And VP Lenny mentioned the 2021 report, where we are number 17. So in 2020, we were at number 16 and the first in Asia. And previous to that, in 2018, we were at number 7. So we've been steadily going down in terms of the gender gap reporting. Now, 99 years represent the number of years that it will take to achieve gender equality globally. And while this seems staggering and it makes you realize that this is not going to happen during our lifetime, this is so much better than the 108 years that was previously estimated in the 2018 report. So there is some progress that that's being made. But with COVID and all the setback that we've experienced lately, also something that we need to look at again. Now, all these rankings are really in terms of economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. So that's in terms of the global data. Now, below that is a gender diversity benchmark in Asia featuring 10 countries, which was done in 2019, just before the pandemic. And in that study, the Philippines was the first in terms of gender diversity in the workforce out of the 10 Asian countries. We had the highest representation in the workforce and in senior leadership. And at the time, based on a survey of professional women, we had the lowest pay gap among all countries between men and women at 10.2%. In comparison to Japan, for example, where they had a pay gap of 26.2%. So really, really large pay gap. Now, when we look at data, there are several ways to build the business case around it. Number one is what is the global data for women and how they're represented in the workplace. Number two, which is the reverse of that, is what about the women customers that all the companies and banks like us service? So look at data in terms of women as customers, women as the purchasing power of women, which is steadily rising and is estimated to reach 3 trillion as of 2019 studies, again, just before the pandemic. And for us as banks in particular, it's also important for us to look at women as owners of MSMEs or micro, small, and medium enterprises, because that is part of our financial inclusion initiatives. And we're glad to say that over 50% of our customers are women owners, MSME owners. Now, when you look at BDO's own data, so for example, look at our employee count. So as one of the largest employers in terms of banks, we are at 38,756 in 2020. And 76% of that population is female, so predominantly female population. And then 59% of our senior officers are female. So in terms of representation in the workforce, we're way beyond targets. In terms of senior leadership representation, again, we're also beyond the targets. So what does that mean for us? How we approach gender equality is really to look at the balance between men and women. So while we do drive the economic participation and voice of women in the company and in the organization, it is also equally important to ensure that there is a balance in perspectives and a balance in diversity and representation for both male and female. So we're in a space where it's a bit different from where the other companies are or other countries are, but we are trying to incorporate more equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal representation. Now, it's also important in terms of data to look at other sources of information, like parental leaves, as also mentioned earlier, the return to work rate. And here we're very happy to have a 99% return to work rate after taking parental leaves. Then there are also the vacation leaves availment. What does that tell you? If women, well, there's a very strong percentage in terms of availing of vacation leaves, which is good. In terms of sick leaves, women are availing more. But in relation to the population, in the percentages, what does that mean? So looking at data gives you a full story of how gender equality and the gender balance is in a company. And the second point that I'd like to share in the next slide is really around gender equality in the context of sustainability. So I used to work in the diversity and inclusion space for Thomson Reuters and moved into this sustainability role, which is really a larger scope. And when you look at sustainability, it's becoming more and more a strongly driven issue by regulators, particularly in the banking industry. And the three pillars of sustainability are environmental, social, and governance. On the left side, if you look at the social issues for sustainability, you would see that diversity and inclusion is there and human rights is there. And under governance, there is also board diversity and governance. And so the opportunity for gender equality to really be part of a company's initiatives under the sustainability space and not just under diversity and inclusion is huge, particularly now that regulators like the Securities and Exchange Commission are requiring all publicly listed companies to submit a sustainability report and detail their performances and initiatives around sustainability. And and again, in banks, for banks in particular, it's the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas or central bank, which is also driving a sustainable finance framework for all banks. So for BDO, this comes into play in our human capital sustainability, where we have committed to promote a workplace, a work environment that fosters diversity, equity, and inclusion, and where everyone receives fair and equal treatment, equal rights and opportunities, regardless of gender, ethnicity, race, age, religion, sexual orientation, and disability, and are valued for their contribution to BDO success. So I hope those two things would be among your key takeaways in this afternoon's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marla. And it's nice to hear about the inclusion of sustainability. Not all of us are aware that this has also already been, in a way, put into the structure of as required by the Securities and Exchange Commissions. You talked about the balance between men and women, and it's important to look at it not just in numbers, but also in perspectives. You talked about harnessing the power of data, the way VP Lebreno talked about, and looking at the purchasing power of women. Currently, based on the last figures, I think 2019, you talked about it, of 3 trillion. That banks as owners of SMEs clearly really an untapped potential, really at the very least, in a way that, you know, a lot of women in business have yet to reach their full potential, and they do need a lot of support. And of course, the most important is to look at the financial inclusion initiative. We'll discuss more about that later on, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions for you, Ms. Marla, as well. But now we'd like to hear from the director of the International Labour Organization for the Country Office for the Philippines. We'd like to hear from Mr. Khalid Hassan. Mr. Khalid, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamila. It's a very honor for me to be in this workshop. Let me start with it. Can we move to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Now, from this slide, if you can see, this is a slide which was taken from the first International Labour Conference way back in 1919. And you can see a few women you can observe a few women sitting in it. Now, for ILO, I mean, the promotion of gender equality is in its mandate from since 1919. And even in the first meeting that the International Labour Conference had, there were 3 international labour standards adopted, and one was on maternity protection, Convention number 3. While historically we see that the world of work has been and continues to be a men's world, gender equality has always been enshrined in ILO Constitution and is an integral part of the ILO mandate. But there continues to be numerous barriers and aspects that keep the women and specific groups of the women in particular from advancing in the world of work. But gender, social norms, and attitudes has played a strong role in shaping the opportunities and challenges that women face in the world of work. Can we move to the next slide, please? I will tell my own experience as a country director. I'm held accountable to the results of gender equality. For example, all country directors have performance indicators, indicators on promoting gender equality. And we are responsible to the highest level, and we show our leadership in promoting gender equality. Now, if you are able to do this, then you are able to support your teams to perform better, and they feel respected in this area. And I feel it is critical for making a positive change to happen that in particular men who are in leadership position should be able to show that kind of leadership. Now, what we do in ILO about it is what are the key means that we use. One is the policies on gender equality and non-discrimination and sexual harassment. The policy focuses on staffing, substance, and structure that we should have gender equality in all these areas. We also have policies on anti-sexual harassment. The second area is that ILO results framework, and one of the outcome is on gender equality, which specifically focuses on transformative areas, which is pay equity, paid and unpaid care work, violence and harassment, and intersectionality. Then, based on these results framework, we have the National Action or Gender Action Plan that in it, and then we have various indicators in it, and we have various evaluations based on those things are conducted, and based on that we improve our response, not only within ILO, but with our partners. As you know, ILO is a tripartite organization. That means we work with the employers organization, we work with the workers organization, and we work with the government. How do we work with our tripartite partner? We work through the Decent Work Country program. You can see the picture of the Decent Work Country program. This is the first Decent Work Country program for the Philippines. Decent Work Country programs are the country roadmaps, and it is produced by the employers organization, workers organization, and the government altogether. Now, the Decent Work Country programs are measured on gender marker, and it shows from 1 to 3. A gender marker 2 means that there is significant contribution to the gender equality, and gender marker 3 means that the gender equality is the principal object of the program. And of course, these are evaluated based on the gender markers. I will encourage the colleagues who already presented that they should, when they're working with the Department of Labor and Employment, they will always be referring to the Decent Work Country program, and where the labor inspection takes place and where various actions are taking place. All these things are reported under the Decent Work Country program of the Philippines. The next very important aspect is ILO normative mandate. I mean, we must have heard a lot about international labor standards. So in ILO, mandate is to promote a gender equality, and it is also implemented through the normative mandates. And there is an array of international labor instruments advancing gender equality, which was referred by our colleagues at various times. EDB mentioned about it. It is for the tripartite constituents to adopt, build their capacity, and to monitor progress on the implementation of ratified conventions. And there are key gender conventions that I will refer to. Number 1 is on the pay equity or equal pay for work for equal value. That is convention number 100. Then we have another one, which is equal opportunity and non-discrimination, convention number 111. Managing work and family responsibilities, unpaid care duties, which fall disproportionately on the woman, is the convention 156. And then the maternity protection and paternity leave convention, which is 183. What are international labor standards? These are standards produced by the member countries of ILO, which is 189. And based on these conventions, then the national laws are adopted based on it. I will focus on the Domestic Workers Convention, which is convention number 189. And you must have heard about Kasamba High Law. It is based on the convention 189. There is a new convention coming up, which is now ready for the ratification by the countries. It is on Violence and Harassment Convention, which includes gender-based violence. It is Convention C190, and you will hear about it in the newspapers and other aspects very soon about it. This is an important advancement in an effort to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment everywhere when it occurs, although the convention protects all, but it has specific provision and principle recognizing that women face violence and harassment more than their men counterparts. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, this is the transformative agenda, gender equality and equal opportunities and the treatment for all in the world of work. This falls under ILO outcome number 6. It has 4 elements, and let's discuss the first element. The first element is unpaid care and domestic work. This is the first in tackling the unfair share of the unpaid care burdens shouldered by the women, and investing in the decent work in the care economy. Prior to COVID-19, women in the region did on average 4 times more work, unpaid work than men. In Pakistan, it was much more higher, as shown by the ADB. COVID-19 has further exacerbated this, we all know. This is to build back better. We have to balance the unpaid care work and domestic work, since it generates jobs and improve the working conditions for the care workers. Now, the care workers will be needed globally because of the technological changes or the future of work that is taking place on it. But on other aspects, we will be looking at it from this angle. So we have to be closely looking into it. Now, as per ILO assessment, where will be the jobs coming up? The jobs are coming up in the construction, jobs are coming up in the care economy, and jobs are coming in the rural areas or rural development that is taking place. So, but we have to make the care economy jobs decent. Now, the second is the pay equity. I mean, it was shown by the video presentation that the pay gap in Philippines is much lower than Japan. So the second is promoting and ensuring the equal opportunities, participation, and treatment between women and men for equal remuneration for the work of equal value. We all agree that women still face discrimination and occupational segregation that is taking place. The third is to ratify the Convention 180. This is the third, is to develop gender response legislation. Legislation is very important if we want to have gender equality. We need to develop policies and measures for the world of work to make it free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. Women, as we know, disproportionately are affected by violence and harassment in the world of work. Although men too are the victims of harassment, and this Convention C190 cover both of them. Sexual harassment is the most highly reported form of gender-based violence, and the risk and the prevalence of gender-based violence has increased with the COVID, as we all know. Now, this is the latest ILO convention, which opens for ratification, and Philippines is presently considering it, and there are good signs that Philippines will move towards the ratification of it. Finally, the intersecting forms of discrimination. It refers to specific groups that face further marginalization where identities intersect. Results in compounding forms of discrimination based on disability, ethnicity, indigenous status, gender, and migration status. So what is the final output? The final output is to strengthen the legislation and policies and measures to ensure that equal opportunities and treatment in the world of work for persons with disabilities and other vulnerable situations. Can we move to the next slide? Now, in the Philippines, many women have managed to go to the senior management level, as indicated in the presentation of the video. But how did it happen? And what was behind this? ILO conducted a global survey of 12,940 enterprises in the 70 countries, examining whether gender diversity initiatives enhances business outcomes. And ILO and Investing in the Women looked into the data of 389 surveyed enterprises in the Philippines. Over 84% agreed that gender diversity enhances business outcomes. This is significantly higher than the enterprises in Asia and the Pacific region, which is 68%. Most surveyed enterprises in the Philippines recognize that gender diversity brings several benefits to the business. For example, over 73% reported increased profitability and productivity. 69% reported increased ability to attract and retain talent. 66% reported greater creativity, innovation, and openness. And 61% said that their company reputation has been enhanced, and more than half reported better ability to gauge consumers' interest and demand. You can see from this figure 3 on the slide. Now, these reported benefits were higher than those reported by average enterprises in the region, as this could be one of the reasons why there is a high rate of women in management in the Philippines. I will move a bit faster on it because my time is finishing, but I just want to emphasize that human resources and public relation and finance administration and pointing occupational segregation does exist. And we cannot ignore the women labor force participation rate in the productivity. Next slide, please. This is quite important, right? Should women work as a paid jobs or care for their families and homes, or both? The graph definitely shows that 84% of women wants to work outside in it and do some. But what is important to note in this one, however, men were double in the number thinking that women should stay home and care for responsibilities. Next slide, please. This slide will indicate to you that what are the areas that we have to do to redistribute the unpaid care work so that women should be available. Next slide, please. This is my last slide in it. Next slide, please. What more can be done to encourage greater diversity in the senior management? We need to conduct gender equality assessments. We need to have gender social dialogue. I will emphasize on social dialogue. Social dialogue needs to take place at the workplaces. Challenges on gender biases in hiring and promotion must be considered, and we need to improve our policies based on Convention 190. And status quo will not produce the results that we are expecting. We have to move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Thank you for that and for giving us all of that data, which we will then dissect in the next part of our program. I'd like everyone to know that we are going to enter a two-part type of discussion where I'll be asking a few questions to our panelists. And while we're doing that, for those who would like to ask questions, you can send your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll go on to asking those questions shortly after. So now let's proceed, to some of the questions that that we've prepared in a way. And to our panelists, please feel free to answer any of these questions that I'll be asking. I mean, you are more than welcome to just chime in if you feel like sharing something that we haven't mentioned here at all. But I'd like to focus in particular to the specific measures by the private sector as the first part of my question. What do you think about the measures of the private sector? How do you think that has actually led to the outcomes for women in the workplace? I mean, how do we measure what are some of the evidence that these measures are actually leading to better gains for companies, and how do you measure these gains? Would any of you like to answer the question or share from your experiences as well? Mark, I mean, I'll call you. When you speak of policies that you've put in place that are, quite advanced compared to other countries, how do you then make an assessment of these gains? And what do you think is the impact of this when it comes to productivity in the workplace?
No, absolutely. I mean, particularly for my industry, for BPO, attrition and absenteeism are issues that plague our businesses. It's not uncommon within BPO organizations to see annual attrition in excess of 100%. And one of the things that we found, quite frankly, was that by introducing child-friendly policies, particularly childcare, as free childcare as being one, we saw a dramatic reduction in attrition to low single digits, almost half the levels of annual attrition we were seeing previously. As many people know, in the Philippines generally is a very family-friendly and oriented culture. But certainly pre-pandemic, we would see spikes in absenteeism during the school holidays. We would also see spikes in absenteeism when family members that were caring for young ones perhaps had an emergency. And again, what we were able to determine from actually putting in more family-friendly policies, we were able to impact those numbers directly, all of which flows to our bottom line. So there is a very, very strong economic business rationale for doing what we've done and what we continue to do. My only regret, being quite honest, is that this is one of many examples where the pandemic has directly negatively impacted particularly women's place in the workplace. And we've done, as an organization, everything we can to mitigate for this. But as you can imagine, given social distancing and the rules on under 18s not leaving their homes, our childcare facilities have been closed for the last 14 months.
That's true. And would anybody like to chime in and answer also the same question? I'd like to discuss the pandemic situation a little later, and we'll see how we can, Ma'am Marla, would you like to share something as well about how do you measure the gains of the policies you put in place, and how do you know that it's actually creating a huge impact on the productivity and basically kind of the mental and physical state of your employees as well?
So one private sector practice that I can share, Jamela, is the practice of diverse hiring, which has been one of the best practices from multinational corporations. So I'm speaking from my previous experience from Thomson Reuters, where I used to handle the Asia and then global diversity and inclusion programs. And diverse hiring refers to several actions, starting with a diverse candidate slating, where you have a policy of making sure that in coming up with a slate for candidates for a certain job opening, you have to ensure that there's at least one other gender included there. So that means it can't be all males or it can't be all females. There has to be one other gender. Then that's also followed by diverse panel interviews, where it's not just the hiring manager and the HR who's doing the interviews for the candidates, but there are also other managers who can contribute in terms of their differences or uniqueness in perspectives, in expertise, in tenure in the company, in age, so that you would then remove the unconscious bias coming from each of the different interviewers. And all of this is based on the premise that there is the same job description, same expectations, so that when you reach your top 3 or top 4 candidates, for example, in this diverse hiring experience, they are all equally qualified for the position based on what you have set out as the parameters for the role. And then there is also the practice of targeted diverse hiring, where you look at, again, data of certain groups. Like if you're hiring for information technology and you know that it's predominantly male, you are then targeting hiring, of all things being equal, everyone being qualified, you're then targeting the hiring of a female to broaden the perspective of the genders in that particular team. Same goes if it's a female dominated section of the business, like maybe HR, for example. So that has worked very well in terms of really broadening the perspective for the business units, ensuring that you are able to gather the perspective of customers as well. Because it's very important that there is someone there to represent the other gender when it comes to dealing with customers' needs, expectations, and anticipating how you can provide better solutions to their problems.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add
Yes,
something? Yes.
Hi, Jem. Then can I just chip in here a little bit? I think that further to the what Mark has shared, attrition is not just a number, right? It has cost involved in it, right? I mean, in the cost that involved in terms of replacement and onboarding, this all adds to really also impacting, right, the kind of work and productivity in the organization. And one of the way to assess also I guess the policies that has been put in place, the effectiveness of it is also the employee engagement, right? So I think a lot of companies do this employee engagement, survey across, the team to understand how engaged the employees are. And we all know, and we've seen a lot of reports showing an engaged, employee workforce, right? What kind of productivity, right, that will actually help the company in terms of generating. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. When we look at the Nordic model as the model for how other countries and regions can advance and improve the workspace for women and children in particular. What do you think, in particular, your company or yourselves as executives, as bosses, as employers, what do you think you have learned from that Nordic model? I mean, of course, we all know that, even in Nordic countries, these never happened overnight, right? But what is it that we can learn from there and actually implement in the Philippines or in the region in particular? Mr. Hassan is also free to join us to, give us further suggestions about how it can be done. But please share us your thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, if you see the Nordic country models that you refer to, there's a lot of investment. They have made investment in quality care services, in care policies, in care-related infrastructure. We need to have universal access to quality care services. We need to have investment in social protection system, ensure quality and friendly gender responses. If you see, last month, both Australia and Canada announced significant investment in care infrastructure. We need to develop care infrastructures in order to ensure that the families are supported in the process. Yes, big companies have the facilities, but we need to develop these facilities for vulnerable groups also. And investment is needed both from the private sector, but also from the government and other partners. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to give their thoughts about, learning from the Nordic model and maybe some of you have tried to implement some of it. What are the challenges in trying to adopt a model from the other continent to here? And would anybody like to share? Okay. So I'd like to pick up from what Mr. Hassan actually, mentioned earlier. He said the importance of implementing quality social healthcare, universal access to social healthcare. But we see that the impact of COVID-19 is actually, in many ways, there are fears that it may also severely, in a way, cripple the capabilities of companies to advance. In the Philippines, in particular, we're facing one of the longest recession as according to economists, experts, since the martial law period, one of the worst recessions in the Philippines since World War II. So now there is fear basically that all of these services may be held back, that the gains that companies, employees and employers have put in place may be scaled back. What are the worries now under the current working conditions, under the current economic conditions? Please feel free to chime in and tell us how you feel and your thoughts about this situation in the Philippines as well.
If I may, from at least from my perspective, I think we, from the very beginning of the pandemic and the lockdowns in the Philippines, we've been very intentional. We've been very clear in our strategy to protect our people first and foremost, through and support them through this challenge. We've invested millions, quite frankly, millions and millions of dollars last year and still this year as well. Why have we done that? Quite frankly, because we need our folks, our team members to trust us. We need them to want to come to work when they have the fear of COVID literally on their doorstep. We think equally, and I think the evidence shows it quite clearly, that particularly the types of clients that we operate with, global clients that we operate with, expect employers such as ours to have the highest standards. Maintaining brand integrity for many of our global partners is absolutely key. And they clearly want to work with organizations like us that actually put our people first. And I say, it is, again, very intentional. We spend, I'll give you a number right now. So far this year, we have spent close to $2 million on our COVID BCP support for our folks, our 10,000 folks here in the Philippines. That's antigen testing every 14 days. That's door-to-door shuttles from their home to the office when we need them in work. That's PPE for all of our security folks, for all of our concessionaires. It's deep cleaning in all of our sites on a regular basis. Again, to me, there can be no shortcuts with these measures, and we do again take a long-term view that we will get out of this at some point, as we're seeing in other countries around the world, and the organizations that have actually placed their people first will ultimately be the ones that benefit.
Thank you, Mark. Ms. Marla, would you like to share your experience about the whole COVID-19 situation? As you know, banks are actually frontliners, I mean, you never actually really closed since the pandemic broke out last year. Tell us about the experience of your employees.
Yes, that's right, Jamela, and I really do agree with Mark. It is, well, for us, it's part of our social responsibility for our employees, for our customers, and for the country, because banks are one of, as you said, one of the frontliners and one of the key functions that we need to have running if we're going to have economic activity in the country. So we just released actually our sustainability report, which has a special report on our COVID response throughout. And how I would summarize that is really mitigating disruptions such as this on the part of the bank at the very start, and even before the pandemic went into, even before it became a pandemic. So it's preparedness, it's having the right ethical corporate governance, where you really prioritize and know that the cost of inaction will increase only as it progresses. So you cannot not do anything. You have to be there for the employees, for the country, for our customers. And like Mark, we have also provided for antigen testing for all our employees. So that's 38,000 plus times how many since March 2020, since the ECQ, the first one. And we've also provided for our security personnel, for our facilities people, our janitorial services. So everyone really that has to do with bank operations. And it really comes out of making sure that everyone is safe and everyone is able to mitigate the impact of COVID on our operations as a bank, and making sure that once the ECQ was lifted, we were back on full operating capacity, all branches open. Even while we were on skeletal workforce, we made sure that all the ATMs were funded. 95 to 99% of the time. But really, it's ensuring the safety of our people, particularly of our branch employees, majority of whom are women, as you know.
Thank you, Ms. Marla. And for me as a journalist, I've covered the pandemic. Since it first broke out here in the Philippines, since the coronavirus pandemic broke out here, and we can really see how the private sector has greatly helped buffer the impact, because we see that government agencies are burdened. Government resources are stretched. And we've seen that the initiative of the private sector to come in and say, we'll take care of our own in a way. Please tell us how we can help, has actually greatly helped, in a way, buffer the impact of not just the economic crisis, but the human toll it exacts, basically,
Yes.
on Filipino workers. And forgive me if I would really like to ask this, because, as a mother, I can only imagine, and hundreds are actually listening at this point, live on Zoom and across the live stream platforms, how hard it has been for working moms who go and do field work, and with their children having to be at doing homeschooling, being in front of the computer all day, and this is for those who work from home, but also for medical workers, how it has been for Filipino mothers. How has it been for your employees as well? Because for me, I struggled with working in the field, but I think the mental stress really is not just worrying about bringing the virus home or getting sick or falling sick, but also that your children are not getting the kind of care that they need because of the current situation. What sort of initiative do you think has been done, or what needs to be done, or what sort of ideas do you have when it comes to making things work better, knowing that there's so much uncertainty with the current conditions? Please do share.
Well, first of all, we launched a telemedicine facility for all our employees, family members, and household members. So that includes, caretakers, nannies, and this was as early as April during the ECQ, to ensure first and allay the anxiety of people on their health and safety. And then when we did ask some of those with critical roles to come in as a part of the skeletal force, we provided food, transportation, accommodations if need be. And we continued that well until we were able to provide full opened facilities and operations. Now, we've also conducted a lot of mental health awareness campaigns internally. We continue to closely mentor team members. And we have a very active COVID management plan, which immediately identifies clusters of COVID cases, if there are any in teams, and with combined with the rapid testing and the PCR testing that we do on a regular basis, sometimes monthly, sometimes every 14 days, then that really helps allay the fears of our employees, majority of whom are women. And in terms of working from home, we have also provided that facility to enable employees, not just women, to more safely work from the safety of their homes and be with their families. And really, it's all these things together, providing all of this for the employees, and at the same time ensuring that managers and officers are closely connected with their teams, so that we can provide advice and we can immediately address concerns that they may have, whether it's professional or personal, particularly around mental health at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Marla. Mark, would you like to share something?
Sure, if I can just add, I think if there is some good that's coming out of the last 14 or 15 months, it is actually changes in the way in which we work. I mean, I think we would all agree that historical ways of working have to a large extent disadvantaged women, whether it's the hours that they have to work for commute to and from the office, and how that then interplays with family life, whether it's the school run or other aspects. I think particularly as it pertains to BPO, in the Philippines, we grew the industry in big, mega, dare I say, bricks and mortar sites. And quite frankly, even once everybody's got their shots in their arm and things, dare I say, go back to some form of normality, we will still have a large proportion of our workforce working from home. And the people that will benefit the most from that, no doubt, will be the women that work alongside us. I would say, I mean, absolutely, I think for everybody, particularly the challenges of distance learning for children in the last 15 months has been enormous, and not least of which for our female employees. The flip side for some of them, though, is that they've actually been able to spend more time with their family during the last 15 months. And again, that's something that I'm very conscious of, and it's certainly an opportunity for us as an organization to double down on that as we carve a path out of this pandemic and make sure that those benefits are not ignored and they're retained in whatever is the new normal.
Thank you. Ms. Audrey, would you like to chime in?
Yes, just to add on to it, we don't have a big team in the Philippines. All of our employees there are able to work from home during the pandemic. I think there are three key things that we looked at here. I think, specifically on the leaders, to help them to become more empathetic, I guess, in this kind of situation where, many of us have to juggle between a lot of different things while they're at home, with the kids studying online and with meals and so on, where you can't even go to the restaurant to dine in and so on. There's so many different things that we are experiencing in the past 12 to 16 months, which we have never once experienced before. So, having empathetic leaders is very key. And of course, the flexibility with the leaders where, sometimes meetings comes in clashes with certain things, and there is some flexibility that being allowed for the employees would definitely help to ease the kind of stress and so on here. So I think these are some of the key things here to look at and to continue to practice, because I know the thing is that the pandemic is still here and we are still working through it. Of course, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but of course, these are things that we have to continue to work on.
Absolutely agree. And I think some of the feedback of some of, colleagues and friends of mine who also work, one of my closest friends who also work in a bank, basically say that, often the problem is that with women, when you work from home, there are no more lines between domestic work and professional work. It's very hard to define because, it seems to just be this endless list of, errands that doesn't seem to finish. And before you know it, it's 9 p.m. Whereas if you actually work in the office, then, the time that you spend in the office clearly marks the line almost between your professional and personal life. So yes, there's a lot to evaluate. I mean, this is an ongoing situation. And, thank you to I'd like to thank our speakers for being generous with their time. But please, if you may allow me to read some questions from the audience. We've received some questions, and very interesting questions as well. And I think the first question may be answered by Mr. Hassan, if he would be so willing to do so. The first question would be, what do you think can companies and organizations do to address, this patriarchal culture that exists in the Philippines, like traditional ideologies that much seasoned employees, both men and women, especially those in senior management roles may have? I mean, how do we change the perception of women when it comes to the workplace? If you would like to answer that, Mr. Hassan.
Thank you.
This is probably the hardest, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, first is that the countries have to ratify conventions international labor conventions, which Philippines has done an excellent job in ratification of the various conventions. Based on the convention, we have to make laws, policies, and programs. And based on those programs, we have to start implementation of it. Like countries which has invested in social protection, they did not receive a lot of shocks, but the countries which did not invest in social protection schemes and did not do those things, they were the most sufferers. Now, Philippines has to get ready for it. Like because of the COVID, digitalization has taken place, and because of digitalization, many jobs have been lost in this process. What should we do about the training of those people? What should we do? How to upgrade those trainings of those people so that they will be able to get the jobs? Philippines has produced an excellent national employment recovery strategy, NERS, and that strategy does talk about all these issues. We need to have unemployment insurance schemes. We need to have training programs. We need to invest in these things. Otherwise, we will be the one who will be suffering a lot in this process. We need to upgrade. I mean, you will observe that most of the jobs that have been lost are for the women. Why? Because of the low-skilled jobs that they are doing, tasks in manufacturing and in tourism. We need to upgrade their skills. We need to develop lifelong training programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. I mean, I think this question is a bit broad, but another problem women face is ageism. What is being done to address this? Maybe is this about age discrimination? Have we removed the cap on, age requirements in our companies? Do we still, put this as a requirement between 15 to 30 years old? Or is it something that we have to get rid of altogether? What do you think?
If I may, one of the things that I think that is, again, it goes back to policies and being very clear and intentional with the type of organization and culture you want to drive. But for us as a senior leadership, but particularly in Transcom, we focus on EQ and IQ, not on resumes per se. And I think that we found once we started to do that some 4 years ago that our leadership sort of dynamics altered dramatically from what was probably a male-dominated leadership team, probably 80-20 in favor of men. Actually, that has changed completely by removing, again, I could talk about it, the conscious or unconscious biases that exist. And I really do think that it behoves all senior leaders in organizations to recognize this. I mean, here I am, a man, talking about these things, and it's ironic. To a large extent, I feel kind of embarrassed being here, in that context. And I can't wait for the time when my replacement is a woman. I really can't. To me, that is, and ultimately for me as a leader, that will be an acid test for the policies that we put in place.
Mark, the next question is also for you, I think. Transcom childcare policy, let me look at that. Sorry, my eyesight is not very good. Transcom's childcare facilities is such an inspiration to other businesses. You mentioned this earlier in your first bit of presentation, but can you share us the data on how this, as you think, has resulted to increased productivity and fostered a positive family-friendly workplace? Yeah,
sure. I mean, I kind of mentioned it before. So I mentioned attrition, single digit monthly attrition rather than double digit, a significant reduction in absenteeism, but also ENPS, which is something that we measure on a very regular basis. We have an ENPS score right now of 60, plus 60. And, that in itself, justifies some of these measures. One of our greatest sources of, new talent acquisition or new talent attraction comes from internally, from within. And you know, when you've got folks working in a diverse culture and a diverse workplace, promoting your organization, it makes things so much easier when it comes to hiring talent across the Philippines. So I mean, you know, those are just some of the things, but there's a lot more besides.
Thank you so much, Mark. My last question will be going to Mr. Hassan. This is sent from the chat group. For ILO, gender inclusive, and this is very interesting, gender inclusive restrooms are still a big issue here in the Philippines. But for the BPO industry, it's easier to impose because of its strong gender inclusive and anti-discriminatory policies. Now, a question for ILO. Are we discussing this with government agencies, in particular with DOLE, so it can be replicated in other industries?
Definitely. I mean, DOLE is very well aware of all these issues, and I refer to the National Employment and Recovery Strategy. That strategy, there was a lot of discussion. It was not only, it was ADB, World Bank, ILO, and many other institutions which was working with the DTI and many other in it. But the point I'm making, technological changes are happening. And in the next 2 decades, a lot of automation will take place. And the women working presently in BPO sectors have low skilled jobs in it. What will happen to it? So we should start preparing now for how will we address all these issues when the technological changes take place. Because of the climate change, many things will happen because of the disasters that we will be facing, like the COVID or other how do we prepare for these things? We need to have clear strategies. We need to do a lot of investment in this, and we need to prepare for it. You said about the aging. Yes, aging is one issue, but transition is also an issue. People transition from one job to another job in it. And when they're transitioning from one job to another job, are there training programs available? Are there unemployment insurance programs available? The employment insurance programs has to be available, and we need to support that. And we will be needing the private sector definitely in that to develop those kind of initiatives and programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. I'd like to thank them for being generous with their time. I hope that this will not be the end of discussions, that what we hear today may inspire new ideas and provide ways to innovate. And maybe, we thank the embassies for giving us the platform, because this could be, pave the way for greater collaboration. We're, have hundreds of people listening and watching at the moment, and I hope that this discussion may have inspired new ways for them to collaborate. So, you may now reach out to any of these companies and organizations. Feel free to do so. I mean, this is what's amazing about discussions like this one. Again, thank you to our speakers today. And now we'd like to move to the next part of our program. We'd like to hear from the former ambassador of Finland to Greece and Albania, who is also the senior advisor for the Department for Americas and Asia at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to hear from the Ambassador of Finland, Mr. Ambassador Juha Puhko.
Thank you, Jamila. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. And thank you for staying online. This is impressive. As Jamila hinted, I mean, we've been more than 400 people online for 2 hours, and that is really good, and it shows that this is a topical issue indeed. Now, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the Nordics, I'm honored to have the opportunity to convey concluding remarks on behalf of my Nordic colleagues here in Manila after such a broad and rich discussion in the last 2 hours. The topic at hand could not be more timely, as has been said, and for many reasons. One important reason being the fact that during the pandemic, as has been underlined, women in many respects have been the ones who have shouldered the burden of the crisis disproportionately. Now, when gradually recovering from the crisis, as we hope, we should heed this opportunity to push for change even more forcefully than before. From the rich interventions and debates, and there have been many good initiatives and examples brought up, I will draw the following 5 conclusions that are not obviously comprehensive or exhaustive, but which I see as pertinent on a general level, pushing us all for more action towards gender equality at work. Now, firstly, realizing gender equality at work is the right thing to do. Although we have been talking about business and the business case for gender equality in working life, I think it's important to recognize that realizing the human right of equality is the very foundation on which our societies and businesses, for that matter, develop and thrive. As we say in Finland's campaign for the United Nations Human Rights Council, while the world is diverse, human rights are universal. Gender equality is a human right. And this is something that the Swedish Minister Nordmark emphasized as well. Secondly, when making the business case for gender equality at work, I think we have to continue to let the numbers talk, and more loudly so. While we talk increasingly about diversity and creativity in this respect, which are important and true, we need to continue to talk about productivity and profitability as well. The numbers that show in cold facts how gender equality makes real economic and business sense. And again, former Norwegian Minister Gabrielsen made this important point, as well as colleagues from business and Mr. Hassan from ILO. This is a crucial topic in messaging the idea. Thirdly, I think we need to recognize that realizing gender equality in general and in working life in particular is a process, a journey where all various societal stakeholders are needed. Politicians, public administration, private business, trade unions, civil society, academia, international organizations. As we know, this process has taken and continues to take time in the Nordic countries, necessitating a continuous dialogue amongst the stakeholders. Ideas and models from other countries and from companies can and should be studied through international cooperation and the work of multilateral organizations like the ADB and the ILO, and like with our event today, sharing experiences from the North. But what I think is necessary is that the concrete steps to be taken in any country are born out of a genuine national dialogue. This way, the needed ownership of these reforms is secured. And to an extent, this is the notion that Vice President Robredo underlined as well. Now, fourthly, like in any ongoing battle, we need to have role models, and as it was put here, mentors, both women and men from real life. And I think it was really uplifting to hear the important messages from high-level dignitaries at our event today. They carry forward true testimonies about the struggles, but about the successes as well. And as we know, we believe deepest when we hear it from the actual protagonists. And finally, in a way, I think the sense of this event was and is that the change starts and goes on with and by action by each of us. As Mr. Gabrielsen again put it, there needs to be a recognition that there needs to be a change in the way that we do things. It is not somebody else's job to create conditions for gender equality in working life. It is my job, and it takes my contribution as well. Everybody being in a leadership position. And as Mark put it, we need both EQ and IQ, and that's a good way to express it as well. Now, with these concluding words, I would like to thank all fellow organizers of this event. Special warm thanks to our Swedish colleagues who were very active, as well as the ADP, obviously, the speakers, panelists, and our moderator, Jamila. Thank you so much. And finally, and especially, I would like to thank our audience on behalf of the Nordic ambassadors. Thank you for your interest. Work goes on, and we Nordics, we are open to further dialogue on these crucial issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We'll do a quick wrap of what was discussed today. The key insights that we've taken, of course, is that investing in proactive measures to support women in the workforce makes business sense and helps with brand integrity, of the private sector. We also heard great examples such as digital recruitment to tackle bias, childcare facilities, lactation rooms, and other targeted programs for women employees. We also have lessons that we've learned from Nordic countries. Investments from the private and public sector are required. The Nordic outcomes did not happen overnight. They took time, they took years, they took commitment, and they required investments both from these sectors in quality health and social protection, including childcare. And also the impact of COVID-19, that there should be no shortcuts when it comes to protecting employees, and investments in putting employees first, as we heard also from Mark, will be important for long-term strategy of the private sector. COVID-19 has hit women particularly very hard, with working mothers having to spend more time on homeschooling, childcare, and policies that adapt and support working mothers to achieve. This will be very critical as we pave the way for the new normal. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd like to thank our Zoom and live stream audience, our participants, our panelists, our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank the embassies, the Asian Development Bank, the Norwegian Embassy, and the Embassy of Sweden in Manila, the Asian Development Bank, as mentioned, the Royal Danish Embassy of Manila, and the Embassy of Finland in Manila. Thank you so much for joining us at the Business Case for Gender Equality at Work. Why is it always important to discuss women's issues and participation in the workplace? Because as the old saying goes, women do hold up half the sky. Thank you very much. This is Jamela Lindogan, and thank you for joining us again. Good afternoon at mabuhay po kayo.
Thank you, everyone.